with observations. There's different styles. There's no absolute in it. There's a participant, non-participant, structured, unstructured. They're not absolute categories. Don't get trapped into seeing them as links that it is this or it's this. Hang on a sec, I got another button here to press. We've got video stuff here. Is my video running or no?
What do you mean?
All you see is the blue screen, right?
Yeah.
You don't see any video?
No.
I see it.
Sorry?
I see videos, and I see your blue screen too.
Okay. Oh, good. So you can see each other?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's the important one. You don't need to see me. So if you get when you look at this here, the idea is on the screen, if I do annotate here, you get, these are continuums. They don't exist as it's participant, it's non-participant, it's structured, it's unstructured. It's that they lean more one way than the other. It leans more to participant. Or it leans more to non-participant over here. It's not is one or the other, it looks more one or the other. So your coffee shops, most of you did the coffee shop. Who went where? Who went to Tim's or McDonald's or Tim's?
I went to Starbucks.
Okay, good. Oh, somebody can afford the $53 coffee.
Who said I had coffee?
Oh, fancy Starbucks. Okay, Starbucks, Tim's. Anybody else? Anybody do McDonald's? Or
I went to McDonald's.
A McDonald's? Okay. Any cafes? People that did like a like a smaller kind of mom pop shop cafe place, or?
I did.
Okay. So we'll talk about the differences in each of those. When you go in, did you think you actually had a social role that you essentially occupied?
Yeah.
What would it be?
I don't know. Like, I would look at it as we were like the customer, so we were there to like be served and like talk with the people who were serving us. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's exactly what it is. That is a social role. It's a part of what everybody's doing when you're in there. Those are all the social roles. So you've got, what are the other social roles that we'd have in that room then, or in a coffee shop? If your customer is one of them, that's yours. What other jobs are people doing? What did you see behind the counter? Because it's observations.
So they would be serving us, they would be making the coffees, they would be taking orders, and then they're like communicating with each other. So, well, I guess I'll just use Starbucks as an example. They basically, one of them would take the order, and then there would be like a couple of the people working behind the counter, and I guess they kind of work together. So they would say, oh, they ordered this, and then they would talk about like what went in it, and then they'd be chatting like with each other while they were making your order. And then there's drive-through taking the order and asking the front staff to get whatever was from the front counter.
Good. Excellent. That's the sort of detail that you'd have if you're doing an observation project. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at anywhere and saying, here's what people do, that's what you've got to define, is you say, here's what the functions are. And then you define in that here's what the functions are, who's doing which one, and then how do they interact with each other. So that's what I asked you to look at. And ideally, you'd start to look at the power dynamics in it. We'll talk about that a little further as we go on, but that's what I'm after. Those that did Tim's, did you see the same sort of things? Or McDonald's? Same sort of activities?
Like, depending where you went, there was also like managers too, who would sort of like just stand there and sort of
Yeah.
watch everything going on. And if people weren't doing things right, they'd chime in. And everybody sort of worked better when that manager was there.
Okay. How could you tell who the manager was?
I saw the same thing too.
Yeah.
Usually, like, the manager was either wearing like a dress shirt of some sort, so he wasn't in uniform, but
Okay.
he was standing behind the counter with like a clipboard or something.
Mm-hmm.
So you could kind of like assume based on that that was likely the manager or somebody of a higher position.
Okay. Now, where was that? Was that a Tim's or?
Well, like I did mine in like the cafeteria here.
Okay, good. All right.
So that was
Anybody do a Tim Hortons or the McDonald's? Somebody that did that. Can you chime in? What did you see watching Tim's or? Can you tell who the manager is in a Tim's or McDonald's?
Not unless you read the name tag usually.
Name tag. Okay.
They have a white shirt.
White shirt.
Mhm.
How about Tim's or McDonald's? Are they wearing a jacket? Any of them? To see that? Or a different color shirt? Or maybe the name tag that says manager?
At McDonald's, they're all in dress shirts and normally like red or blue ties. But at McDonald's as well, you have to be careful because they also have gels, which are guest experience leaders, which wear white dress shirts and a red tie, and they come out and like help the customers one-on-one or with kiosk. And like sometimes if it's an older customer, they'll actually bring their food to them so that the customer doesn't have to stand and wait for their food with everybody else.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that. I was hoping I could get that the other day. Hey, I'm old. She said, not old enough. I didn't get her. I'll be sitting over there. No, I'm not old enough. Wait your turn. So that clothing piece is a part of a stop figuring out what role people are playing. So the manager is a different role. Being able to identify that's the role, and then as well be able to identify in the observation is, how did I determine who the manager was? Well, it was the clothing, dress. Starbucks, can you tell who the manager or supervisor is? By their clothing?
I more so was able to tell who they were because the behaviors of the employees kind of changed when the manager was around.
Good. That's the big deal, and that's the stuff that starts to indicate power, which we'll roll through this class today. But you get that notion of, for some it's clean. This is the manager because they're what they're wearing, and in others it's not so clear, and you've got to look for the subtleties and activity to figure out who's in charge or who's the dominant person.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go back to, let me pull you back to the screen here. So at this one, you've got different levels of observation. So the participant one is you're fully involved. So there's 4 or 5 people. You are one of the people in it. That's what you're going to do for next week. But then the non-participant is more you're on the outside edge watching. So, and this is where I said it's a continuum. On a level of participant, would you see yourself more as the participant or non-participant when you go in as a customer? If it's participant on this side and non-participant, and non-participant on this side.
I mean, if you come in as a customer,
Or to see. We're going to try a new little trick, a poll. Where would you, on a scale of 1 to 10, so let me write this up. Oh, this is cool. You're going to get a poll pop up in a second. Add a question. What do you see? Do you see a screen that says Zoom?
No.
What do you see? Anything?
Still see the blue
Just the
PowerPoint.
slide, yeah.
Oh, okay. Excellent. It's got something blinking on my screen. I don't know what it all means. Uh-oh. Okay. We're not going to do this because I don't know how to do it. So let's just do it verbally. I don't know where my screen went. It disappeared on me there. Let me bring it back. And now you know why I still use a BlackBerry. Technology. Okay, so let's do my line again. Here's my line. So participant is here on the left, a non-participant. So make this 1 as participant and 10 as non-participant. Where do you think you would sit in your as the customer in a coffee shop along that line? Were you more participant or non-participant? Where would you place yourself? Somebody
No.
just throw out a comment. You see yourself kind of in the middle? Let me pull up an X here. Where should I put the X? Here? That's not right. X. More this way? More this way?
I would say like more participant,
You thinking more over here?
just because like when you go up to order something, you're going to somewhat influence sort of how they address you and in what ways they address you.
Good.
So you're influencing their actions to a certain degree.
All right. Anybody else?
I agree. Participant. Just because you are acting in the role.
Okay. So you're actually engaged in a role. But how long's your engagement? Do you have much impact on the environment?
I would say yes, because I feel like they think that they have to act a certain way as long as they have customers in the store. Well, you would hope that most of the time they would act a certain way with customers in the store.
Okay.
So I would say we're much closer to the participant side because of that. So not
Okay.
necessarily do we play like a specific way. However, they are acting a certain way while we're there sitting and watching what they're doing.
Good. So when you come in and engage, you identify yourself as a customer, which puts you in a role, which does actually connect you with them. That allows you to be there and present, right? Did any of you get caught? So did you make notes while you're in there? Any of you make like written notes or type on your computer while you're in there? So if you're typing and making notes, would anybody notice you or care that you're in there? Probably not. It's a coffee shop, right? Lots of people doing that. Any of you get caught looking where you're watching, you get a sense that they realize you're watching them? Or did anybody, if you were in a smaller cafe, sort of a mom and pop shop, would you, in a place like that, do you think you would get more, how long do you think you could go in and sit in the place before somebody's going to come and say, are you buying anything? If they've only got 4 tables available and you come in and sit down with your laptop and start watching, how long could you sit there before somebody's going to expect you to, they're going to notice you haven't bought anything? Would it be different there than a McDonald's or a Tim Hortons? I think so. You could slide into a more restaurant-y place and nobody notices or cares the same way as in the small business they are. So you now become, the nature of the environment makes quite a difference. I would suggest you're probably somewhere along the line here in the coffee shop. You took a role, but after you engaged, and if you bought a coffee and sat down, you engaged when you went to the counter or you bought something to eat. But then you sat down and just watched. If you didn't buy anything, you still got a social role. So to say that you're completely non-participant doesn't work, because you actually did engage in the room. You're obvious, and you might be in their gaze or they might be in yours. A key piece, so what we speak to here, this is the Hawthorne effect. You might want to write this one down. This is the Hawthorne effect. Hawthorne is the person that came up with this notion of when you're engaged in observations, you're going to affect the room. just by presence alone. The coffee shop, just by being there, they're aware. So one of you already said that. There's a customer. You're a customer. If there's any of you worked in the service industry where you've got to deal with people, or worked in a restaurant or whatever, as soon as you got customers, you've got to be aware of their concern, right? You want to give them an image. You want to make sure they're served. You got to make sure they're satisfied. You got to make sure they pay their bill. Customer means you're present and they're aware you're present. That's the Hawthorne effect. So you have verged on that a little bit. Next week, you'll see more of an impact on it. So rarely do we see the full non-participant one. So I'm going to try and throw up this video now because this one is non-participant. Oops, slide this down here. The non-participant tends to be very structured. Conditions are all set up, and then what they do is watch. So let's have a look at this one. Should have made my picture further down. The one-way mirror, I am going to put on a different screen. On my load. Okay, so let me pull up another screen. We're going to watch a little video. Let's see if I can get the volume up loud enough to make it work. If not, I'll flip it up for you. I think I got my volume working now. This one, share screen.
Michael is about to observe the replication.
Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we'll let it run for a couple of minutes.
Social psychologist Stanley Milgram devised a test.
So,
Ordinary law-abiding people would give a stranger a lethal electric shock in the name of science.
so this is a structured, non-participant, experimental design. You've probably heard that language. They use experimental design in, when I talked about during the sampling week, I talked about the medical model, when they go into a village to test the drug, whether it's good or not good, or once they get they've got the group that's untouched, then you've got a control group and nothing changes with those people, but so in the medical one, they would get the sugar pill, and then you've got the experimental group, the ones that actually receive a treatment, and you do a comparison afterwards. So this is kind of along that same path. Here's a group of people. We know exactly what's going to happen. The same thing happens to all of them. The only variation is who's sitting in the room, our research subject. So this is the Milgram experiment. It's a redo of it in 2009. The original was done in 1961, and it was seen as bad science. It sort of got the ethics discussions going. So anyways, we'll just watch this and let it go. But I want you to watch for variables in this, because here's some of the trouble with structured. We think we can control everything. What we try and do is control the variables so that they're not an impact on what goes on. And why did these people decide to do this, or why do they choose one activity over another? In it is, if you control all the variables, you take them out, you reduce the impact of variables, so you're down to just the one and say, okay, we know what this is about. So this is a study of authority. I want you to pay attention to the scientist in the room. He's an actor, but look at his behavior. See if you see changes in what he does.
Twelve members of the public arrive for what they think is a memory test. They're introduced to another person they believe is another volunteer. As if the professor will be running a test. What do we do? The volunteers are also looking at their being social psychologist Dr. Kevin Stark will be one of them.
So these two are non-participant. So this would be like the researcher. this guy's from the media. This guy's a social psychologist. In Canada, he'd probably lose his license for doing this, but whatever. It's England. So these two are outside. They're watching by camera what's going on, completely non-participant. And the idea that it's structured, it's all set up. So the scientist is an actor, and the other guy's an actor. This guy's an actor as well.
The actor who's acting as the professor comes in and talks to the two participants, try and convince them that what's actually happening is this.
I can't see the video. It's just paused.
Rather than actually.
Is it paused?
Same.
Yeah.
The professor reveals that the experiment will involve.
Let me try this. Can you see it now? Is it working now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now that guy asked a specific question, right? These people have been told that they're helping a research project to see how others learn. They know they're going to administer an electric shock, but everybody's agreed to it. Now, this last guy, though, said, well, like his question is that what it's about? So what his question raised, the scientist says, oh, no, that's not the issue. The issue is to see how they learn. In fact, the guy hit right on it. It's how much shock are they getting and why are we continuing? That is what the real research project is, but these people have been lied to about what it's about. So are they a resource, back to week one, resource or collaborator? If you lie to them and get them to do stuff, are you just using them? Or are they working with you?
No, they'd be a resource.
Yeah, but they made them feel like they're collaborators. That's part of the problem with Milgram. Anyways, we'll carry on. Okay. So, structured environment.
Yeah.
It's real, it's very clear, that's all structured, all set up. It starts to change from one person to another. So all they're looking for is same treatment for everybody.
What the participants don't know.
So Aaron, gonna let this run the next little bit. We'll just go right into the second one. The scientist is engaged. Now, hang on, let me pull this up, share my screen. I have too many buttons open. Share screen. Back to this. Now it's structured. The experiment is structured. The researcher is on the outside observing. But what about that scientist place? If we go back to I wonder if are my arrows still there? Did my arrow stay or my arrow left? Oh, look, my arrow's left. Wow. Okay, so if you go back to that, let me draw my line again. If you've got participant, how participant is that scientist in the project? Heavily?
I would say so.
Influence on what's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're fully in it. Now, what they've done to make it, and this is where it's got a participant piece to it, but it's structured. It's a participant because that scientist is engaged and influenced their activity. But what the scientist says and does is very structured. They've established that and said, these are the words, you say the same words at the same time to each person. And then we see what they will do. So let's flip to a new share here.
Hasn't been receiving any shots at all. His responses are being played on a pre-recorded CD.
When I get to intense shock, and then extreme intensity shock, and then dangerous severe shock, I need to stop really, don't I?
Well, the experiment requires that you continue.
What about in dangerous severe shock, and then the XX?
Well, please continue the experiment. Thank you.
It's a pretty directive position, right?
Participant here deferring to the professor, and that deferring to the professor carries with it a diffusion of responsibility. The responsibility.
Now, you've got to be careful here. This gets to what I talked about in week 1, the notion of bias. This guy talking that's doing the analysis is a social psychologist. The study was a study of authority. Do people listen and do as they're told? And in that study, so he's kind of now explaining what they learned out of the Milgram experiment, but he's got a bias. His bias is a psychology background. It's all behavioral science. So everything he says, it's not that he's wrong, but you've got to weigh in that where he comes from. His exposure is to this one line of thought, this one discipline of thought. So does he break out of that? He talks about her deferring to the authority. Okay. Or she's deferring to her own, that she realizes she signed an agreement and the guy on the other side said that we both agree to the same thing. Is it authority, or is it her commitment to what she said she'd do? We don't have enough data to make this conclusion that it's a deferral to authority. Although Milgram's has got more people, so it's a better sense of analysis. The quantitative piece makes more sense of it. But in this guy you can't make that sort of, draw that conclusion from this little bit of data. However, the point in it, this was a learning thing to show us what happened with Milgram.
For this is not entirely hers, so much as it is to the authority figure that resides with her in the room.
We're on danger now. But you say it won't be really dangerous to him.
There's no lasting disadvantage.
His body language in the back, authoritative.
It's like his form and everything. So he was okay with it. Paper A cup B ball. It was Scary Goose. That's incorrect. It's 225 volts. Number 3.
And it's a classic example of what Milgram showed. Somebody who, at face value, poses no threat to anybody, can, in these kinds of circumstances, recede to the point of inflicting severe levels of pain.
Is it A cup, B ball, C aeroplane, or D lampshade?
What do you see in her face? Do you think she looks troubled or curious?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
Scared.
A little, yeah. Do you think she looks like heavily stressed, or she's kind of, what's going on there? In it, we can't tell because it's just an observation. And there's the weakness with observation. Your coffee shop, what you thought you were seeing, how much got left out of what was actually occurring because you could only observe. Did any of you get to hear? Were you close enough to hear what people were saying behind the counter? Because that would change. Would it change it if you could hear what they were talking about behind the counter to get a sense of who gets along with who and whether they like each other or not? Sure. Would body language help that? You might be able to read it somewhat, but it could just be a day where somebody's pissed off at the other person, but in fact, they're best friends. It's just a day where it's a pissy day. That single observation, you've got to be, often people will draw conclusions that are flawed because they don't have enough data to properly make the assessment. You need more time, you need more information, which would be hearing what they say, not just the observation. Let's watch her some further. Watch the changes in her face, though, at the different levels.
You have to treat the absence of responses. Just continue the procedure.
Okay, no response. Just one answer. 390 volts.
So now he's gone silent. So after the protest from the learner in the other room, the idea is now that the learner goes silent. So potentially there is the idea that these shocks have actually either rendered the learner unconscious or possibly even killed.
C chain or D bicycle.
So it's a little more stress there.
They almost,
Clearly. So the words help us to be able to validate what we think we saw.
405 volts.
Incorrect. 225. I'm not sure if I'm happy to continue doing this with you. It really feels like it's not right. The experiment requires that you go on. No, I know, but I don't really take any pleasure in putting that through a human being. This is an experiment. It's essential that you continue. Where did I get to? 3. He was all for Jackie again. Yeah. The prompts drove him back to the task. I think it was interesting that that second prompt talks about how essential it is for him to continue. It's essential that he continue. I think that draws on that sense of obligation to the wider scientific project. Because a scientist doesn't have any coercive power, can't force you to do it. Well, I think that's interesting about how this paradigm works and why this paradigm works, is that the influence is ideological. It's about what they believe science to be, that science is a positive product. It produces beneficial findings and knowledge for society that are helpful to society. So there's that sense of science as providing some kind of system for good.
Now, do you think in what they saw, he can make all those conclusions? That's the bias. He's come in with that pre-existing idea that all these people have bought into science. As science does something socially, it's good. That's what he believes. That's certainly what his discipline is about. That's what he studies. But the assessment on this, at this level, with this few people, this small amount of data, that's way too big an assessment to make. Milgram draws that assessment for us because Milgram's got lots of people. He's explaining what came out of it. But often you will see in research, this is the sort of thing you would look for if you've look at research findings that have been developed based on observations. You want to get a sense of, ask the questions. How many people were in it? How long did you watch for? What are the variables? What variables did you take out? What happened? What differences did you see in the way that scientist gets people to continue? To see some as being more directive, some as more supportive, getting buy-in from the research subjects? How about the language? He says the experiment requires that you continue. Waving his hand, when he shifts his hand forward, wait a minute, nope, don't want to do that. Press the button. When his hand shifts he does that, please continue. What's the significance of that hand movement? Sorry, jump in.
Sorry, it's like a sign of control almost.
Yeah, it's directive. He says the experiment requires you to continue. How about when he says there's no lasting tissue damage? Is that a directive statement like the hand, or is that there's no lasting tissue damage, so it's okay to keep going? It's got a softer sell to it. Any of you had a boss where you've got an authoritative boss who just tells you what to do, they're directive, and then you've got the nice boss you like, they explain what they want you to do and why they want you to do it? How much more would you do for that boss that explains stuff to you?
Much more.
Yeah, it's a buy-in issue. So at that buy-in place, that becomes a variable in this research project, depending on what that scientist says and does. To say that this all hangs on authority, that's what the project really is about, is studying authority. Well, there's different levels of authority. So now you've got the variable of just directing and telling authority, and then you've got the variable of softer authority that's buy-in. Buy-in is often more effective, although it doesn't hang in authority. Again, back to, have any of you worked at a place where you've got there's the boss who's in charge, and then there's somebody else who's not the boss or not the supervisor, but it's the person you listen to? Big boss versus supervisor, you listen to the supervisor over the big boss because the supervisor's in close, you have some faith in the supervisor, over time, you've got to know them. So typically when you look at big organizations and you look at deviance from organizational behavior, the deviance is at the supervisor level. Supervisors run the shop. And they have a lot of say because they can get buy-in. Good supervisors can get buy-in and people will follow them, follow their lead. So, and to deviate, and we're going to do this instead of what the official policy is, it's because you accept the person and their commentary on what you should do. You accept that because of who they are. It's not just official. So let's watch the last bit of this. So that absolutely would be a variable in this. The way, when he interjects and how he interjects, the more directive versus the buy-in would be a variable. The sounds they hear that they believe are from the person in the other room, it's actually a recording. That's preset. When they press whatever voltage, when they press 225, they'll all hear the same thing.
But here's the power of authority and the belief that the scientific experiment is being conducted for the greater good, enough to persuade the participants to go all the way to the end and deliver the fatal 450-volt shot. Yes, please. The experiment requires you to continue.
I'm going to have to treat that as an incorrect answer, and it's 450 volts.
No answer incorrect, 450 volts.
That is incorrect. I have to give you 450 volts. 450 volts. 450 volts.
9 out of the 12 participants went all the way to the end.
450 volts.
In Milgram's original experiment, the majority, over 65% of people, went to 450 volts. That's it. You've gone to the end of the experiment. Thank you very much. Immediately afterwards, the subjects are told the true nature of the experiment.
So the third one we'll watch next week. But so is there an impact? You think it changed things when that scientist makes his comment, when he says carry on? If the people asked and he says keep going, the experiment requires it, is that different than they just go quiet? They seem to be debating what to do and he says carry on, the experiment requires you continue. If he interjects on his own versus they ask and he answers, that's a variable in my mind. If you're looking at how do people make decisions, again, they've drawn the conclusion that these people have continued because of the scientific project. I would argue that potentially they've continued because they made a commitment to continue the project. So they're just honoring their commitment, and they know the person on the other side of the wall honored it too. How long they pressed the button. So as an outcome on the data. So in this one, 75%, and here's where the numbers you got to be careful with. Milgram's got a lot of people that he did this research on. 65% went right to the end. In this one, 9 out of 12, that's 75% went right to the end. So if you reported this in percentages, it would seem that, whoa, we've got worse. People would draw the conclusion that society's got less attuned to hurting others because more people went to the very end in this project than they did in the first project. They don't tell you how many were involved in research subjects in each of the projects and how they came up with that number of 65% and 75%. The percentage makes it look like we've changed socially. Somebody could make that argument. It's a really weak argument. In my mind, it would be invalid. So reliability and validity come in to experimental design, and structured observations is one method of that. Because reliable is you getting it from a good source. It's coming from, when you look at this is 12 people picked relatively random off the street. Reliable. the validity is how good is your conclusion that you've drawn from that data? What's missing from the data? So validity really speaks to how good is your data rather than just is the source as good. Reliability tends to be more towards the source. So let's stop that. And do you need a break? Or should we do a little bit more?
No break.
No break. Okay.
Peter's wherever we're going in our house.
Yeah, well, we'll go a little further and we'll stop and grab a coffee or something. So that's structured. This is a very structured one, participant versus non-participant. You were, so if you look at unstructured, now we're outside of the participant, non-participant place. Structured versus unstructured, your coffee shop, would you say structured or unstructured? Let's go to the same little arrows again.
For the coffee shop?
Unstructured because it's more of a natural environment rather than like a structured one where there's a condition.
Okay, good. So you haven't set the conditions on it, so it's unstructured, natural environment? Is that what most tend to agree with that?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Okay, so structured is over here. And, oops. Non-structured is over here. So you can't even see that at all. So it would seem to be, and here's where depends on how you word it. So your coffee shop would seem to be non-structured, right? It probably is somewhere over in this range, you would think?
Yeah.
So if you're doing it the way you did it, you just went in, it's a one-off, you went in, you observed, you're observing the people behind the counter. It's a natural setting. If you decide to make it, you realize that they're all designed the same. If you go into Tim Hortons, they're all got the same layout, or you go to McDonald's, the layout's the same. You start to realize that. Maybe you're going to do a piece on coffee culture in Canada, and you're going to look at Tim Hortons. So looking at Tim's, because you realize Tim's is sort of spread out everywhere. So you're going to go and watch Tim Hortons, different Tim Hortons in different locations, different times of the day. Maybe you're going to do it every Friday night at 10. Maybe you're going to do Friday night at 10, Friday night at 3 a.m., Saturday morning at 8, Monday morning at 8. You're going to establish it. Your project is structured because when you're going into each place at each time, you've got a very set standard to when you come and go. But if you go to it's an unstructured environment you're looking at. You've got an unstructured environment because these people, there's no control over what they do. But you realize the way things run behind the counter is very similar. It starts to lean more to structured because you're going at specific times. You've structured your project to make observations of an unstructured environment. Does that make sense? Your project is structured. So it's not that your project's unstructured. The environment you're watching is. Nobody controls it. Now, if you start to see, though, in different Tim Hortons, you see the clothing, you see the manager, the cashier, you see the social roles are the same. You see the way the back counter's set up, the same kind of social activity. You might then start to say, this is actually a structured environment. They are going, because all of the foundation work, the framework around which these people work in is the same no matter which one I go to. So I'm looking to see how the people interact with each other in each different one, but the foundation of what they do, the structure, is the same. So when you think structure, I usually try and turn stuff into other things in life. All of you have seen that parking lot being built across the way from the school. Yeah. So that parking lot right now is at the structure phase. You see the steel going up and you see the cement floors. That's all that's there. That's the structure for the parking lot. It will get fleshed out later. There'll be more materials put on it to make it more of a parking lot. But right now, the foundation of it and the structure is there. So when you look at an environment, that's what you're looking for. Are there things that are sort of set, like the concrete and those steel beams that establish how the activities occur? So one that I watched, an observation one that many years ago, down at Yonge and Gould, so it's just Yonge and Dundas, so heart of downtown. There's a little sitting area that had 4 or 5 of them, maybe, the little cement round benches with chessboards, checkers boards, chessboards set into the stone. So people used to gather there. It was kind of a hangout spot just for young people, but it was people who came and played chess or checkers. And what was interesting is, in it and just watching, I didn't need to hear commentary because I could watch and realize, oh, look, people show up, they open up a little box, they got all the chess players out, they set them up. So somebody would sit down and set up their chess players, and they'd set them up on the other side and just wait till somebody else sat down and they played chess. What was interesting, though, is I was there often at different times. In the daytime often, lunchtime, there was this guy that appeared to be homeless. He's got like a little cart full of clothes. He'd pull up, he'd sit down. He had his chess players out on the board. But what I realized is there's some guy came over from Bay Street area. Anyways, looked like a business person. Guy's in a suit, overcoat, sometimes a briefcase, but certainly in his suit. So he looks like he's working in an office. He'd come over as well. But what happened is, I realized over time is when these two started playing chess, so the business guy and the old homeless guy, others would gather around, and they'd gather around and start to watch. And what I realized, took a while without hearing commentary, what I realized over time is it's not about social status. Well, the social status wasn't about what you work or what you have. It's how well you play chess. Others had all stopped to watch these two guys play chess, and I think my read on it is because they're the best chess players. It was a longer game. It would stop, and I think a couple of times I saw it looked like it stopped, and then the next time they came back, the players were set up the same way, and they continued their chess game on the following day. So the social status, the roles were, we could see them in different social roles as who they are, what they look like, where they appear to work or not work, or how their lifestyle looks to be. But when it came to that little environment, in that structured environment, the social status was based on their ability to play chess. So all of the outside social statuses got thrown out. They were discarded because it's about the game. So it was an interesting piece to watch. That could sort out, took a long time to sort out, but to sort that out just with observation. So you can do research with just observation, but it tends to be, it's limited. So, so an unstructured environment, I would say it was in a natural setting. And my observation that period was straight unstructured, natural setting, watch what went on, made notes. At some point, I had to interpret what I've gone on, and you've just heard my interpretation of what it was about. So if we bump then, things exist not in categories of one or the other. They are lean more to structured or unstructured, and they lean more to participant or non-participant. It's not absolutely one or the other. So the problems with it, we all think we're observers. We do it all the time, and our biases come in. We make decisions. So the homeless guy sitting down there, you think he's just some nut going to sit down at the table, and it turns out he's not some nut. He is, at least at that, there in that corner, he's recognized as a significant chess player. The social bias, the way we look at that person. Interesting, I see it sometimes with observation. When my hair is longer versus shorter, what I wear with my hair, how I absolutely get responded to differently. If I show up I've been doing construction. I've got clothes that are all like they got paint or stain or they're kind of messy or torn a bit and long hair. I go to Home Depot. I am just another worker. I go into Swiss Chalet for lunch. Not so much. There's a little different way they're going to look at me and deal with me. If I go in and pick up groceries, just a little bit different, whereas Home Depot fully accepted, just based on my clothing. That starts to jump in because we do it all the time. We make conclusions. So let's push on to the next. The bias point of view that comes in. If you got it, the hard part, back to the beginning, that first week, I said, think about your bias. The hardest piece of observation is to undo your own bias. Think about, so when you went into that coffee shop, what did you already know about coffee shops going in? What did you assume you would see? Any thoughts on what you expected? Sorry, my parrot here is yapping at me. It's cockatiel, somebody asked. In a minute, it's going to fly in my head. Think about what you expected to go on in there. Did you see something different just by watching the people behind the counter? Anybody start to see body language, maybe cut eye, maybe some people talking and there's somebody left out? Did they all look like they're connected? Or do you see disconnect? Can Starbucks work well if everybody's disconnected, do you think?
No.
They've got it, you've got, because what did you have? You said you've got the one who takes your order, somebody else fills your order, somebody else gives you your order. I was in one, there's like 6 people doing stuff. It was kind of funny to watch, but they were all absolutely, it was like they're playing, right? They're having fun in their day. Tim's, could you work at a Tim Hortons and not be connected with the other people behind the counter? Would you need to be socially engaged? Could you dislike the people you're working with but still function?
Yeah.
Yeah, electronic. How about the window? Any of you notice which one's probably gets priority service? The drive-through versus, was there anybody in place where there's a drive-through? Could you tell if there's a priority to drive-through over counter service?
There is.
How's that work?
Because they time how long the cars sit in drive-through for, so they want to like push the cars through drive-through faster than the people that are inside the store.
Okay. And do you know that because you know somebody that worked there or you've worked at one of those places?
I just have seen like the counters before and that they always, like, I'll be standing inside and I'm like, but I came inside because there wasn't much of a line and the drive-through line was huge and I'm still waiting longer.
Okay.
Outside.
Excellent. Good observation. Anybody worked in a Tim's or McDonald's? One of those places with a drive-through?
Yeah, working at McDonald's and Tim Hortons, you're told sometimes that if it's really like high level, both on drive-through and window, it's more likely that drive-through is going to get their food first. Even if someone on window ordered the exact same food, but like 2 minutes earlier, drive-through is more likely to get it first because they're trying to push the cars through and like just trying to get all the cars out faster because we have to have like mentioned before, you have to have a certain time limit on each car, and it's like 90 seconds per car is our time limit. And if you go over more than that, then you have to like pull them forward, and then like you have customers in drive-through waiting even longer, and then they just like, I came through drive-through for a reason, and it's just like I didn't want to come and sit. I came to grab my food and go. And it's like, it's probably the worst in the morning when you get like the 6 a.m. people going to work and they're just like, I came to get my coffee. There's a reason why I didn't come inside. I just wanted to go to work and now I'm going to be late. And you're just like, you're doing the best that you can, but they keep getting mad at you and you just honestly don't know what to do anymore after that.
Okay, good. So that, what you've got there is that service thing. That's part of how you're measured. And I understand from people that have worked at Tim's, I think that's part of how they look at your quality of your service is how quick your drive-through works.
Yep.
So if that's the case, then you might see that. So good for you for being able to figure that just observing. If you work inside though, you've got more data. And that's when you get this, you know that in fact drive-through is more important. So again, the observation versus the participant observation, that's where it starts to show up a little bit. So that is where, when you start to, in it is being careful with observations. We think we got it all figured out, and we're often wrong. How many times, think about yourself in life, have you thought you had something figured out about somebody or people around you, and it turns out later you find out more information. Oh, I didn't realize, right? Oh, disabilities. We can get short with each other because somebody seems to be letting us down, and then we find out that they've actually got a disability, and then what? You feel a little bad for it's. Oh, that actually was hard for them. I had a guy that I worked with that for 22 years, people around him were kind of bothered because they didn't know any different, what things were handwritten. But at some point it went to electronic typing, typing up reports and forms and stuff. And everybody's complaint was he just took forever. So they didn't want to wait for him, because what happened is when it went to computer, he had dyslexia. He never told anybody. He knew he had dyslexia, and for 22 years he was able to function because handwriting, he figured out how to handle it. When it went to electronic and they demanded that he go electronic, it made it really difficult for him. It slowed him down. The complaints changed when people realized that, oh, all they had was their observation that he takes longer. And as data, it was pretty clear. Everybody else can do it in about half an hour. Why does he take between 45 minutes to an hour for what everybody else gets done in 30 minutes? Observation alone. More data says this is an explanation that helps to make sense of it. So observations are good, but we have to recognize the limits to them. So that influence, back to again, the influence that it has on us, you want to make sure you've got that Hawthorne effect in your head. It is, that matters. So in the coffee shop, you had a little at the beginning. In the Milgram experiment that we just saw redone, that scientist had significant influence over those players. That was the point in it, though. The research is to see if he can influence them. So at some point they start to observe, and that's why I asked, did any of you get caught looking? Did you realize at some point where the people behind the counter, did one of them catch your eye, sort of look at you, maybe wondering what you're doing, or did you make eye contact with people behind the counter when you're sitting at your table? Anybody stumble into that? Any of you uncomfortable when you're being observed?
Little bit. Little bit.
Okay. How do you feel doing presentations at the front of the class? How many of you have got your camera blocked out because you don't want to be observed? Think about that stuff. We do it all the time, right? And there's nothing wrong with it. It's not that I'm saying you need to flip on your camera. That's okay. Your discomfort teaching, standing at the front of the room doing presentations, the discomfort, what is it you're worried about?
People's judgments, I guess.
People are going to judge you. They're going to judge you because what they see you do. Anybody worried about tripping when you're at the front? Anybody stand close to the table so you don't, your notes in front of you? Anybody do that? You start reading your notes because you don't want to screw up and leave something out? That's all normal behavior. Faculty are no different than you. There's faculty. If you watch your faculty, so do it watching. Some of you have instructors who stand right behind the podium, never move.
Yeah.
Some who sort of go away from it a little bit, but they keep their hand on it. They're within reach of that podium because the podium's the anchor. It's the safe place. And the notes are there to make sure I cover the material. And then you've got the other ones who are just kind of lost and we wander around the room because we can't figure out what direction we're in. So,
or like going back to the tripping thing, like when you're at a special event or something and you have to present and you walk up the stairs and you know the stairs are there, but you look at them anyways because you're afraid that you don't want to fall in front of like 100 people.
Right. So that concern for being embarrassment is about the concern for being observed. It's that you are now in everybody's eye. If you're coming into class as a student, you come in, you slip in the room, nobody notices. If you come in late and slip in, do you hope that nobody will notice? What if the whole room turned and looked at you, or somebody said, oh, look, you're late?
Avoid eye contact.
So, right? So that being observed is a big deal, and we get caught up in it. So I think that probably is a good spot. That's where you see the struggle, I guess. That was on that last slide, is the notion of it being a struggle. That's where you start to see what's going on in social interaction. That little place of struggle is where everything becomes a lot more visible for us. So I think that's a good spot to take a break. Why don't we take 10 minutes? Get yourself a coffee, get up, move around. My bum's falling asleep sitting here. I'm gonna go make a coffee and come back. So 9:30, is that good?
Sounds good.
Okay, good. I will be back then. Otherwise, it'll just be on pause. What's your group you saw there? Age group.
Age group? I didn't see any young people there at that time. I saw it was actually older people.
Okay, so that would be the sort of stuff you would define in describing the place. The coffee shop, 9:30, middle suburbia, here's what I see. Now, if you kept seeing that, you could establish that and say there's a structure to what I'm seeing. There's a social structure to this. It's not set by anybody, but the reality of the way it plays out is this location, this time of night. Think about if you went back a month ago on a Friday night, or in the summer on a Friday night in a Tim Hortons in middle suburbia, who's in the parking lot? 30 young guys hanging around one little Honda. The engine's revving, right? They're standing around. That car culture thing is a definition place. It's where it becomes experience. You say, oh, this is what occurs. If you went on a Friday morning to that coffee shop you went to near the city center, do you think you would see a different crowd maybe Friday morning at 8 a.m.?
Yeah.
Or 7 a.m.? If you were there, is it open 24 hours?
Yeah, yeah, it is, yeah.
If you're there at 2 a.m., would you see a different crowd maybe on a weekend?
Yeah, probably.
So we could guess that we might. You need to do the observation to confirm it, or you do the cold observation where you're not going to guess at anything. You're just going to show up and see what's there. So it's about a mindset of how you want to go about doing it. You need to lay that out, though. If you do an observation project somewhere, you need to lay that. Coming in, here's what I was thinking. Here's what I expected. I found that, or I didn't find it, or I went in with no expectations. You've got to make those statements to make it meaningful. So that's the place. You should be able to define a place really well. Anybody take a picture of where you were? Because that would be valuable if you had a picture set up, or if you had a drawing on a piece of paper even, because the layout would matter. If you talk about people sitting in a coffee shop, I think about one here. I can describe one that I've been to. You walk through the doors, 2 glass doors. There's a vestibule about 10 by 10, maybe 10 by 10. Another set of glass doors. You walk into that, now you're inside the coffee shop. It's Tim Hortons. It's about 15 feet to the counter. The counter's a glass counter, straight across in front of me. It's about 20 feet long, and it curves off on the left side. It sort of curves off in a rounded end, and it's got the cash register just off to the left a little bit. As you go through those first set of glass doors into the main restaurant, you would then see the immediately on my left, there's planters on both sides of where I've entered that are about 6 feet long. Between the glass door and the planter, there's an opening on each side of me that opens and takes me into seating areas. In the seating area on the left, it's a table of 4, a table of 6. I'd actually lay out a drawing to make sense of that. There's a one big table that sits 8 people. From standing back at the doorway off to the right, there are tables of 2 and 4, and then there's a long counter that's mounted against the glass window looking out onto the parking lot with 6 chairs set in front of it. You want to be able to describe that kind of detail, and that's where a diagram helps. There's washrooms off to the right. There's a set of tables off to the left beyond that cashier at the register that have no windows in that area. It's a little closed and isolated spot with 6 tables of 4, 2 and 4. So if I describe a bunch of young guys on a Friday night sitting in that place, or young people sitting engaged in a conversation that was getting kind of excited and maybe a little louder than the rest of the room, if I describe that in front of the glass window versus in the back corner where there's no windows, it's about how observed might they be engaged in their activity. Are they conscious of their environment? So that description of the layout of the place would help to make sense of the activity I see. The car culture thing. You've got young guys standing around a car in a parking lot. They're out there on Fridays and Saturday nights for a long. Well, that's gone on. And it might sound new because I describe it as a bunch of 20-year-old guys standing around little Hondas or Acuras or whatever, and the hood is up on a car, and they're all looking at the shiny engine. And so that might all sound new, but if you look at it over time, you realize that's been going on since the 1940s. Guys have circled up in parking lots. I was doing it in the 70s. We showed up in parking lots, looked at everybody else's engines, and then we went up to Markham and raced our cars down dirt roads where there was no police until somebody went off the road. Then you check on them, and then everybody would leave. So, oops. But that's not new. It would seem new from the description, but as you describe the layout and you describe the age, it's maybe not the car that it seems to be the focus of it. It's more about having people gather in a social setting. And when is it? Well, it's on weekends at night. That's what the issue is. So what appears to be the issue for those people, you as a researcher observing, or if you watch, or if you read something where someone is talking about what they've seen, the thing they're interested in is what people are doing and why they've gathered together. They're interested in the social experience, not in the car that those guys happen to be interested in. So their object is different than your object. Those people that you're watching, like the Milgram one we saw there, our interest is the people that are doing it. Their interest is what they're doing. So describing where they are, how they're set up matters. Who are the players? What's the status in it? What's the role? So in your coffee shop, what are the roles we had? Actually, you already said that, the Starbucks one, right? We've got, what do we got? Cashier? Anybody in a place with a server? Would a server be more aware of you're there, more observant of people than a cashier, perhaps? Could you tell if there's a manager? The status is an interesting one because there's different ways of establishing status. There's the formal status and informal. I'm going to come back to that. Just keep that in the back of your mind for a minute. What are the things they're doing? So this is the way they interact with each other. What's the social issue? Are they might have to deal with each other because they have to. They're required to pass information to somebody else for it to work, to be efficient. But it's the body language, maybe the cut eye, maybe who's talking to whom. Those observations start to establish for you what are the relationships in the room. And to some degree, you can get that from observation. You can get a sense of who's connected to whom, how they are. You won't know why, but you'll see that the relationships are different. Because it's just that these are the two who engage in conversation, and they seem comfortable and casual when they're in conversation. Starbucks. How would you be able to know who the supervisor is in a Starbucks? Anybody have any idea? Do they all look the same in Starbucks?
I don't know. I don't know.
Huh? Next time you go and look in the window, because I've only ever stood outside of Starbucks to look in the window. I can't afford to go in the door. So, but if you've been in, are they all wearing the same little apron, black pants, white shirt?
I usually see like the manager wear like a suit, like not a suit, but like a dress shirt and like a tie.
Good. So white dress shirt and a tie. That might be an indication of manager. Good.
What if it was a girl? They don't wear.
Sorry?
What if it was a girl?
Okay. Now what? What if your manager is a girl? What would she be wearing different?
I don't know.
So now this is where roles start to help us. What would we do if you're a supervisor? What are tasks do you have to do that the employees wouldn't be doing? Maybe the end of the day.
Like counting the money, maybe.
Yeah. Might that be an indication of supervision?
I usually see them going like in and out. Like sometimes like they go in the back and do like things and then they come out if it's busy and how to help their servers.
Okay. So that activity might indicate a supervisor role. They're gone for a longer period of time. Good.
Yeah, and sometimes like when they come to serve, like they're not on cash. They just sort of like they step in to make a coffee, give you their coffee, and that's what they do.
Mhm.
And then they leave.
Good. So being able to describe the activities people are engaged in helps you to establish what some of those social roles might be, what some of the status is attached to the roles. The person who can afford to stay back out of the way might be the one that might be an indication of status in their position. How about the person who cleans the washroom? Who cleans the bathrooms if there's an emergency in a Tim's or a Starbucks, do you think?
Like the grade 9 kid.
The new kid? Everybody thinks the new kid. Anybody work for a boss who would be the one to go do it because it's busy?
No,
No?
no, not where I worked at a food court. They never did that.
No?
I would do dishes. I would take the trash out.
Mm. So if you've worked in a place where you've had a boss that shares the responsibilities, says, I'll do the shitty work today too because it's my turn, might you be more connected with that boss socially?
For sure, I feel appreciative.
Yeah. It might be harder to distinguish from observation who the boss is as well. So Tim Hortons, the manager or the supervisor wears a jacket or a tie or a label. There's something that makes them look like they're the boss. But then you see them go and clean the washrooms. So now you've got activities that go together with what appear to be a status by structure. And now you see it. So what it does is change your social setting. You've got a boss that's more involved with the players. If it's really busy, you go in and you see that person who it's just really busy, who then goes and cleans the washroom. There's the ones who will direct someone and say, off you go do it. But others who just go do it because it needs to be done and can't. And I remember seeing that at a place, Starbucks. And it was, somebody came to the counter and said, oh, whatever it was needed to be done in the washroom. The person that went and did it absolutely was the manager. You could tell by their clothes. So that would change the way I'd have to describe the social interaction between the players, because I don't have necessarily a spot of absolute authority. The authority's got a shared feeling in it. So it would harder to define. If it wasn't for the clothes, I wouldn't have been able to know they were the manager. Counting cash might be the thing. You look at the activities that might help to determine status. So back to anybody who worked at a place where you've got a boss who's the boss, but you've got somebody else you listen to. Somebody who isn't the boss, the person you go to for advice. Informal. They've got status, although they don't have a social role. The activities you watch start to establish that they have status within the group. And that's what you're trying to identify. For us, what we're concerned about is status. Who's got say? Why do they have? And in it is why do they have say? So that's the activities helps in observation. Time sequencing would matter. If you did the Tim Hortons, you went to the same Tims at different times of the day, that would give you a different sense of a research project. So if you read one what's done an observation, you want to dig in and say, when did they do them? How did they do them? Did they make observations on a coffee shop always at night at 9 o'clock? That's different than what we said earlier, who you'd see in the middle of the night. If you did downtown Tim Hortons, if you did Queen and Roncesvalles versus middle suburbia at 3 o'clock in the morning, you think you might see a different result?
Yeah.
If you did King and Spadina at 2 o'clock on a Friday night versus in Newmarket at 2 o'clock on a Friday night, different environment, right? You got a clubbing crew versus middle suburbia. So those start to play in considerably into how was the data gathered. So how valid are the findings? If they don't narrow the findings to say, so if somebody was doing coffee culture at Tim's, but when you look at when they gathered their data and how, you'd start to say, wait a minute, this is the same stuff all the time. This doesn't tell us about coffee culture. This tells us coffee culture at 9 o'clock in the inner city on Friday nights. So that reliable, but not valid. So you would challenge the findings on that. The rules, so here's what starts to get important in your observations. Explicit versus implicit rules. The explicit rules are the ones that are posted. Any of you been in a Tim's or in a McDonald's where they've got the sign on the wall, 15 minutes, 20 minutes? Parking is for customers only. That's so they can come and throw them out. They got guys hanging around the parking lot on Friday night. They can say, get out. They can call the police and say, time to leave. If you watch, and so it's interesting, we watch that sort of car culture thing in a park, like a coffee shop on a weekend in the summer. They're standing around a car. There might be one or two have coffees, and there's 30 guys standing there. It's got nothing to do with coffee. It's just the place they can connect and meet up socially. So in that, the explicit rules don't always get enforced. The time that class starts, right? We start at 8, sort of. If I locked the door at 8 o'clock, that would change it, right? It's a very clear, explicit rule. So the rules in my classes are implicit. They start around 8, as opposed to it's 8 o'clock, that bell, like the clock ticks, I start going, the door is locked. That's a very structured, explicit rules, very formalized, very structured. Unstructured seems to shift more to implicit rules. Everybody sort of gets it, so we all show up. If we didn't have any rules at all, how would you know when to even show up in class? Well, right? Or even like for this, if there was no email to say, so 8 o'clock, come online, this thing will work, right? You don't know about it. So there is no rule. So there needs to be some element of rule. Don't hear rule as dictating what should happen. The rule is just a sense of here's how we come together. When you think about it in social terms, it's a sense of people connecting, and it establishes some element of structure to that. So the explicit is the boss wearing, if you look at status, if you look at organizational structure, the explicit rule is the manager wears this uniform. The implicit rule is the coworker you work with that you go to for advice. It's not the manager or supervisor necessarily, it's the person that's actually got some say that you listen to. That, making those descriptions is kind of ethnography. You're starting to look at this group of people and you're saying, how do they function given this environment? How do they function in it? What meaning do they attach to their actions? What do they think? What does it mean to talk to the supervisor? Well, I do because I have to, because it's formal, but you can tell the way they talk. Any of you, when you go into places, you notice that when the boss is there, people act differently? They talk differently?
Yeah.
Starts to change. So that's the notion of official power. We shift the way we act when the boss is around because we recognize they have this official authority and we don't want to have difficulties for not following that explicit rule of who's in charge. I stand and talk to my friends and visit, but now, oops, the boss is here, I need to stiffen up. No different for faculty. We can be walking down the hall, have a visit with each other, hit class, and if you watch, we're really interesting to watch because you see us come in the room and you see some change. It's like putting on a suit of armor. They suit up when they come into the room. They're gearing up to present to their customer, to their client base, to you guys. It's what do I need to make sure goes smoothly to make this go right? Because my job is to deliver material. So I deliver material. If I think all I need to do, though, my job only goes so far as to make sure I say all the right stuff, I get all of this stuff said. All I've got to do is stand in front of my window, my little screen there, and make sure I get all of the PowerPoint stuff covered. If I think of my job as trying to help you to learn it, I'm going to try and come at it from different angles to make sense of it. Open the room up for you to comment. I'm going to guess somewhere you've had teachers here, high school, where you've had somebody who essentially stands and reads their PowerPoints. What are they giving? What are they doing? They're delivering, they're meeting their social goal. They're delivering what they're required to do. They're meeting the explicit rule. They haven't gone beyond that to the implicit part of, I'm here with you for us to learn. So that's listing those activities, identifying roles, and then the activities that players are doing within each role help to make sense of what's the social setting about, what does it look like. This last little bit here, this is really important when you start to get this. Who's got official power? Who's got real power? Typically, observations, a lot of people think, oh, let's do an observation project. That'll be easy. It won't. Surveys aren't easy. You figured that out a couple of weeks ago. Observations aren't easy. You've got to lay out all of this detail and then figure out what's going on. You're trying to figure out what the rules. Some of them will be written, some won't. The 20-minute rule in parking lots, they don't enforce that. But if it's Friday, Saturday night becomes a problem because you've got this set of young guys who keep showing up with cars and it's turned into a car lot, they're going to start enforcing that official rule. So what's official, what's not? And when you start to think about power, so everything for me does come down to power. Who's got official power and who's got real power? When you see the term power, think about decision making. Who gets to make the decision? And then, so some it is, I'm granted the official power as the course provider to come up with a way to pick up. So we're in the midst of that where the official power comes from Guelph, who says we're going to run our courses again. So administration says we're going to run it. They delegate that official power to me to say, so you figure out a way to continue to deliver your course, but do it in an alternate method. And so I decide that this is the best method to go, and hopefully it works for you. Real power starts to be if I've listened to what others said, and to people in the room would say, wait a minute, what about this, what about this? And we develop together a method. I might still at the end have the final say, but because everybody's connected to the decision, how to input on the decision, now my power starts to have a little more real sense to it. The boss you'd go to for advice, or the coworker you'd go to for advice, has got real power. On this last bit here, if you think about this, so if we're in the big room, we're in the room, the fire alarm goes, and we've all had that, right? The official message is fire alarm is you're supposed to run out of the building, right? But I'm standing at the front of the class, or somebody else says, no, don't worry about it. We'll just wait till the words stop going, the alarm, and we'll just carry on with the class. Real power. You've decided to listen to that person at the front of the room instead of the official system that says, fire alarm, everybody get out. You've taken on, so the boss you would listen to, and I think of that, the big boss says you should go left to go out the door, and your supervisor or a coworker says, no, go right, and everybody goes right. Why? Because we acknowledge the person's decisions. There's something about that person that we recognize their decision as the more meaningful one. That's real power. So when you see power, or you get a sense of power, I think it's an interesting lens to look at stuff through. When you start to look at it from the sense of power, think about it in terms of decision making. Who gets to make decisions? And then these last 2 slides for the PowerPoint, I'm not going to go through them all because we have. But this is essentially lists of stuff you would put down. You would answer these questions. If you're going to do an observation project, you would go through each of these and answer these questions. How many are the actors? What are the roles? What status goes with what roles? Which roles have ascribed status? Who can achieve that role? Who could be the boss? Who could be the empowered one? Who could be the one that everybody listens to? Those become key issues. And you, at the end, as you start to do your analysis, you start in that you're saying, here's the explicit rules, but here's the implicit rules that exist. This is how we establish that we can identify this person as being the one with real power, because they're the ones that everybody listens to. There's implicit rules that everybody agrees that this is the one